Hi, I'm Chad from Arctic Horde Wargaming. Thanks for coming to the channel. What you're going to see coming up next is a post-game, but instead of a normal post-game, we broke this out into a separate video because they go over the individual units in their army and why they benefit when they play them. So this is more of an in-depth into each faction. So I hope you like this. If you like what we're doing, like, subscribe, and share. Definitely tell all your friends. We'd appreciate that. Comment down below and let us know what you like on what we're doing, or if there's different things that we could do that you would like to see. Thanks for coming to the channel.
So I'm Jordan. I'm kind of one of the resident Legions of Nagash players. They're all over the place these days with the book. And one of the best things about the army is the new book basically included most of the Grand Alliance in this single tome. So you get a ridiculous variety of units. And I got into Age of Sigmar mostly to play the undead. I was a big fan of the undead from the video game Warhammer Total War. And I was like, this is a natural jumping off point. I love the skeletons and ghosts and all sorts of like vampire magic and that sort of thing. So I just really like the aesthetic, and that's honestly the first jumping off point you should probably have for any army. As far as death itself and how it plays, the Legions of Nagash tends to be more of a horde-oriented army. You don't have to play it that way. There are alternatives. But the optimal way to play it, if you're going to, say, a tournament, is generally going to be a decent number of things like skeletons and these Grimgas Reapers. The Reapers are a new addition. I talked about them a little bit during the game. They're excellent defense, good offense, especially against other Horde units. And the nice thing about bringing big blocks of Horde units for Legions of Nagash, you get 30 of these guys, or 40 skeletons, or 30 Graveguard, or something like that. When they die, if you have your general still alive on the board with a command point, close enough to a grave site, you can just bring the unit back. And I think it's a bit overblown exactly how powerful people think this is, simply because you do have to keep in mind you can't use the unit really unless you make the 9-inch charge the turn that you get in. So there is some element of unreliability, but just being able to get your whole unit back on the board is extremely powerful. Other than the excellent infantry that's durable and does good damage, Undead also has access to, well, Legions of Nagash has access to some decent cavalry, things like Black Knights. I don't think they're necessarily optimal, but you can certainly run them, and they work well. Some people like the Death March Battalion to use Black Knight cavalry to just charge at the enemy. Most of the Soul Blight stuff, specifically Blood Knights, probably could use some work. I don't think that they're very optimal as far as the units. But if you want to play an all-vampire army, Legion of Blood is pretty good. And the Blood Knights do get extra attacks, and you can run that Vampire Lord that I was running. And with all those traits that give him very powerful defenses. There's just sort of a little bit of everything in Death. You have some of the best magic in the game, probably outside of maybe Tzeentch. It's arguable, though. But like Tzeentch and the new Goblins also have very good magic. But Legions of Nagash has excellent magic, and Nagash, of course, is an extremely powerful caster, and that's partially why he's very popular at tournaments. If you bring Nagash, one thing to keep in mind is that you don't get a lot left in the army. So you're going to have to be very careful about what you put in the army with a Nagash, because, well, there's not a lot there. But Nagash on his own can do quite a lot of work. 8 spells and +3 to cast on everything, +3 to unbind. He basically can cast whatever he wants, and he shuts down enemy casters almost always, unless you're against like Lords of Change or something. Other than that, Death has some good cheap battle line. Things like wolves are only 60 points for a 5-pack of them. If you don't have any wolves, zombies are okay. They're just not as fast and not quite as durable unless you take like a big horde of them. But I think that skeletons are more fun for a big horde. Other than that, there's the most important thing to keep in mind, I think, when playing Death, is keep your heroes alive, especially your general, because your general is, with a few exceptions, the only one that can bring back entire killed off units, which is a very powerful ability. And oftentimes your general will be a sort of big centerpiece character like a vampire lord and a zombie dragon or Nagash in order to prevent them from dying, because it's really hard to kill those big guys. But there's optimal pathways to bring just a vampire lord on foot with like the wings as your general and just keeping him behind a rock or something so he can't get shot. Of course, there's some dangers to that, but then you have more points to throw into skeletons, I guess, if that's what you want.
What about like Manfred, Neferata, Archon?
The Mortarks generally, the consensus tends to be that they're overpointed, except for Archon the Black, who's very well pointed. Archon the Black costs, I think, 320 points. Yeah, which is pretty competitive considering he's a little durable, and he's got, I believe, 2 spells, but he gets bonus to those, and he can also has an excellent battalion that gets him and the other wizards in the battalion extra spells, which is a popular alternative to taking Nagash. You've got a bit more diffused spell power. The other Mortarks, Neferata, she's okay. She can put down some okay damage, but I find that she's a bit swingy. She doesn't spike super hard, but still sometimes she whiffs. And her abilities, actually all the Mortark abilities as far as I can remember, like their abilities and command abilities are all useful. And they all make good centerpieces and generals for an army, if you don't want to go with the Vampire Lord and the Zombie Dragon or Nagash. But Neferata at 400 points is a bit expensive in my opinion for what she does, and Manfred at 420 is even more so. I think Manfred might be a better deal than Neferata, I'm not sure though. Manfred's a bit more durable, but I mean 420 points is a lot for an 11 or 12. I think he's 11 wound model, and if he gets shut down, you're just out so much. And compared to the Vampire Lord on the Zombie Dragon, which costs 20 more points and can be a lot more durable and a bit more consistent, I think, in his damage output. At least as far as my experience.
What about like the corpse cart and the 2...
The corpse carts.
Yeah, the corpse cart, and then I'm also thinking of what are the other 2 with the spirits around them?
The Mortis Engine, yeah, and the Coven Throne and all those. Yeah. So the Undead has a bunch of different carts or chariot sort of things that they can take. The corpse cart I've never used myself, so I can't really talk too much from experience because I've never used it on the field, but from the consensus of the community anyways, the corpse cart can be useful if you're bringing like a zombie heavy or a wolf heavy army, which are less popular builds, but you can make them work. It's a lot of chaff because the corpse cart buffs those units. The other sort of things that you can bring are the Mortis Engine is a sort of chariot that you generally will take mostly because it's a part of Archon the Black's battalion. And I think it buffs your wizards, but it's okay. I wouldn't bring it though unless you're bringing a pretty heavy caster army and using Archon the Black's battalion. It also does like a big mortal wound bomb once per game, but it's a little bit unreliable, I feel. The Coven Throne is, in my opinion, a bit underrated as far as a hero goes. She is a little expensive, clocking in at 260 points. But she does have 12 wounds. Not nearly as much damage as something like the Vampire Lord, but a lot cheaper, or on the Zombie Dragon, but a lot cheaper than the Zombie Dragon. And she also has a spell called Beguile, which basically means that she picks a unit and that unit's not allowed to target her next turn, which can be very useful if she's in one-on-one combat with another unit or just trying to stay alive one more turn. And I think that the Coven Throne is probably the cheapest option for a death hero that's like to pick as your general that is fairly survivable. because she's still got a 4-up save. You can put things like Griff Feather Charm or Ethereal Amulet on her to make her a little bit harder to kill. And she can just kind of sit in the middle of your army and do all the stuff you need the generals or vampire lords to do.
What do you recommend for endless spells?
Endless spells, I'm not generally sold on most of the predatory ones because I find that they just as often hurt you as they do your enemy. But there are a couple standouts to use with death. The most useful in my experience has been using the spell portal along with the Nagash list, or an Arc in the Black list. Though I'm not sure exactly, they might have, don't quote me on the Arc in the Black because they might have FAQ'd how Arc in the Black's ability has played into the spell portal, and I haven't used him in a while. But with Nagash, the spell portal is extremely useful. I always joke that Nagash doesn't cost 800 points, he costs 860 points because you have to bring the spell portal.
So the newer spells that came out with them, what do you think about those?
The ones, well, Death didn't get any specific spells that came out with them for Legions of Nagash. Nighthawk got some spells, some endless spells, and Nagash is allowed to use them. I don't think that they're really worth mentioning, so I won't.
What about placement of the grave markers? You got any tips on that?
I like to place them sort of in a square near the center of the board, but it depends on where the objectives are. In a game like the one that Chad and I just played, I did that, and I do that sort of thing in most games. Generally with the grave markers closer to my side, so I get the full benefit of the healing buffs, and I'm able to keep the enemy away from them. Because if the enemy can stand on the grave markers, they don't block you from using their healing abilities, but they can block you from summoning units from them, like reviving units from them. Because you have to revive fully within 9 of the grave markers, but fully outside of 9 of an enemy. So if an enemy's standing out on all of your grave sites, you're out of luck if you want to bring stuff back. So if you're playing against someone with a lot of fast like MSU style small units, then my recommendation is that you just be pretty careful with letting your enemy get close to them, because they might block off your reviving points if you're counting on that in the game. But if you're up against most armies, it's not a big deal most of the time, unless you place them in a silly place. But yeah, just put them all in the center, near the center of the field most of the time. You can use their healing, unless you want to do some sneaky play, putting them over on the corner and getting your general to warp over and summon a unit. You could do that. I tend to not deep strike, though Legions of Nagash can, well, not quite deep strike, but they can summon units at from the grave. I don't prefer doing it generally because then you don't get to use them the first turn they're on. But there are legitimate strategies where you could make use of that. Other standout heroes is the Necromancer. You want at least one in every army, pretty much, unless you're running something silly without any summonable units. You almost always want Necromancers. Their spell Dance Macabre is one of the best in the game. It basically lets a unit, one of your summonable units, pile in and attack twice. So, I mean, you just get to attack twice. And with a big blob of 40 skeletons or 30 Grimghast Reapers or 30 Graveguard, those attacks hurt. So that spell is excellent. And the spells from the lore that you can take are also very good. In particular, Overwhelming Dread is an excellent spell. And there are a few others in that lore as well. For the lore of vampires, I often take Vile Transference because it can do damage and also heal you. And I often take it on like my vampire general, be it the Vampire Lord on the Dragon or the Coven Throne, because that gives them an extra source of sustainability, which obviously helped this game, seeing as how close he was to dying. Yeah, other than that, Morghast are a fun little elite unit. You can use them to just do a ton of damage, but they're not as survivable as you might think. Always bring the Harbingers because you're allowed to bring the Halberds on them now, and I think that being able to charge with 3 dice is just flat better than getting some extra mortal wound save. And I think that's about it for death. There's a lot to the army, but really all you need to know is just big blocks of dudes, run them at the enemy, and just bring them back to life when they drop. All right, that's it. Bye.